It was April 12, 1991. A 26-year-old patrol officer started what should have been a normal shift in rural Kentucky. She was young, sharp, and respected by everyone. But that night, she never came back. Hours later, her patrol car was discovered abandoned on a forest road. The engine was still running. The driver's door was wide open, and she was gone. Massive search teams swarmed the woods. Helicopters circled the skis. Divers swept every nearby river, but not a single clue turned up. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. For 15 years, her case stayed cold. Families whispered. Officers argued. The entire town lived in fear, wondering what had really happened that night. Then, in 2006, a cave explorer crawling through a narrow passage spotted something half buried in the mud, a police radio and a badge. And what came next was far darker than anyone could have imagined. What happened to the young officer that night? Did she fall into danger by accident, or was someone waiting for her? Stick around, because this story only gets more mysterious. And before we dive in, make sure you hit like and subscribe so you never miss these real-life mystery stories. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from right now? In a small Kentucky town, everybody knew the young patrol officer. She was only 26, but people already saw her as a steady hand. Kids waved when she drove past. Store owners trusted her to keep their streets safe. Older neighbors said she reminded them of when officers were like family. She grew up in that same town. She wasn't rich and she didn't come from a big-name family. What people remembered about her childhood was how serious she was, even as a teenager. She always wanted to help, to protect. In school, when other kids joked about being famous, she said she wanted to wear a badge. When she finally became an officer, her parents were proud. Her father would say, "She doesn't just wear the uniform, she respects it." And that was true. She worked hard, trained harder, and never treated the job like it was just work. For her, it was personal. Her fellow officers trusted her. She wasn't careless. She didn't cut corners. If someone called 911, she showed up. If another officer needed backup, she was there. Everyone agreed. If trouble came, she would stand her ground. That's why her disappearance later didn't make sense. She wasn't the type to run. She wasn't the type to vanish. For her community, the idea that she could simply disappear was unthinkable. It broke all logic. On her days off, she spent time with family. She laughed with her younger cousins, babysat for neighbors, and joined church picnics. She wasn't just the cop in town. She was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's best friend. People trusted her with their children. They trusted her with their safety. That trust was strong, and it made what happened next not just strange, but terrifying. If someone like her could be taken in the middle of duty, what did that mean for everyone else? This wasn't just about a missing officer. It was about the entire town losing its sense of safety. And it started on one ordinary night in April 1991. It was Friday, April 12, 1991. The young officer started her evening shift like always. She checked her gear, badge polished, radio clipped, flashlight ready, service weapon secured. Nothing was out of place. She signed in at the station. Other officers joked about weekend plans, about grabbing late dinners after patrol. She smiled, said she'd see them later, then walked out to her squad car. The night was cool. The streets were quiet. It felt routine. She pulled her car onto the road. The radio crackled with small updates, traffic stops, noise complaints, nothing serious. She drove past the same gas stations, the same houses, the same back roads she had driven 100 times. By all signs, it was going to be a normal shift. She didn't know this would be her last. Around 9 p.m., she was assigned to check a rural highway outside town. It wasn't unusual. That stretch of road was dark, quiet, and mostly empty at night. She had been there before. She radioed in that she was heading that way. Dispatch logged her location. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The officer drove down the winding road, trees pressing close to the pavement. Her headlights cut through the darkness. She kept her eyes on the road, scanning like she always did. It was habit. Every shadow, every curve could hide something. To anyone else, it was just another night. To her, it was duty. Protect the town, protect the people, do the job right. She didn't know that somewhere in that dark stretch, her shift would suddenly end. At 9:30 p.m., the officer's voice came across the radio. It was calm, routine. She reported her location on the quiet rural highway. She gave no sign of stress, no hint of danger. Dispatch acknowledged her message. Minutes passed. Dispatch expected her to check in again, but the radio stayed silent. They called her name once, no answer. They called again, louder this time, still nothing. Dispatch checked her location and grew uneasy. She never ignored radio calls. She never stayed silent this long. At first, they thought maybe her radio had cut out. Maybe she was chasing down a speeding car. Maybe she was dealing with something minor and forgot to answer. But the silence stretched on. Other officers were alerted. They got in their cars and headed toward her last known position. Their headlights cut through the night, racing toward the rural highway. Every officer knew the same thing. She wouldn't ignore a call. If she wasn't answering, something was wrong. The minutes ticked by. Radios crackled with updates from cars racing across town. Still, no word from her. When the first units reached the stretch of road she had last reported from, they slowed, scanning the darkness. And then in the beam of headlights they saw it, her squad car. The engine was still running. The driver's door was wide open. On the ground nearby, her hat lay in the dirt. A flashlight rested just outside the car, as if it had fallen from her hand. But the officer, she was gone. No struggle marks, no broken glass, no gunshots, just an empty car, lights on, engine humming, abandoned in the middle of the night. She had been there minutes earlier, and now she was gone. At first, dispatch thought nothing of the silence. Radios cut out sometimes. Maybe she was busy with a driver, or maybe she'd stepped out of the car. But after 5 minutes, unease grew. This officer never ignored calls. She was known for being sharp, quick, and reliable. Every cop in the department trusted her. Dispatch tried again. Unit 47, do you copy? Static. They tried a third time, nothing. That was when a supervisor made the call. Something was wrong. Nearby units were alerted. Officers from across the county began heading toward the stretch of highway where her last transmission had come from. Their radios crackled with short, clipped words. Nobody wanted to say it out loud, but they all knew this wasn't normal. Sirens cut through the night as patrol cars sped down country roads, red and blue lights flashing against dark tree lines. Neighbors peered out of windows, wondering what was happening. A few even stepped onto porches, watching the lights streak past. Her fellow officers drove with urgency. For them, this wasn't just another call. This was one of their own, and she wasn't the type to vanish. The dispatcher repeated one more time. Unit 47, if you can hear me, respond. Silence. By the time the first patrol car neared her last known location, everyone's stomach was in knots. It wasn't a delay anymore. It wasn't bad radio reception. Something had happened. The first responding officer turned down a narrow dirt road and saw it, her squad car. The headlights were still on, casting long beams across the gravel. The engine was running. He stopped his car, heart pounding. He called in what he saw. Other units rushed closer. When they walked up, the scene felt wrong. The driver's door hung wide open. No sign of her. Inside, her coffee cup sat untouched in the holder. Steam no longer rose from it, but it hadn't been spilled. On the passenger seat lay her duty notebook, open to a half-finished page. One officer carefully looked around the ground. That's when he spotted something in the dirt just feet from the car. Her flashlight. The lens was cracked as if it had hit the ground hard. Next to it lay her patrol hat, the brim pressed into the soil. The silence of the woods pressed in. No voices, no footsteps, no movement. Just the low rumble of the idling engine. More officers arrived, surrounding the area with flashlights. They called her name into the trees, their voices sharp, commanding, but edged with fear. No answer. One officer shut off the squad car's engine. The sudden quiet made the scene feel even heavier. They searched the roadside ditches. They checked nearby fields. Nothing. Back at the car, supervisors studied every detail. There were no skid marks on the road. No signs of a fight. No dropped radio. It looked as though she had simply stepped out of the car and vanished. Within minutes, the call went out. Officer down, possible abduction. The scale of the response doubled. Highway patrol, sheriff's deputies, even state troopers rushed in. Helicopters were scrambled. Bloodhounds were requested. As they secured the scene, a chilling truth settled over everyone. This wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't an accident. An officer, one of their own, had disappeared while on duty. The untouched coffee, the open notebook, the abandoned hat, they weren't just objects anymore. They were evidence. Evidence that something terrible had happened on this lonely dirt road. And whatever it was, it had happened fast. The more they studied the scene, the stranger it looked. There were no skid marks on the dirt road, no shattered glass, no sign of gunfire, no overturned chair, no sign of a fight. It was as if she had stepped out of her squad car and been erased from the earth. Officers formed a perimeter. Flashlights cut through the dark woods, beams bouncing across tree trunks and brush. They called her name over and over, voices echoing into the night. "Officer, do you copy?" Nothing came back but the sound of crickets. The bloodhounds arrived, noses pressed to the ground. They sniffed around her patrol hat, then her flashlight. For a moment, their handlers thought they had a lead. The dogs pulled toward the tree line. But just a few dozen yards in, they stopped. The scent ended, like someone had lifted her right out of the woods. One officer crouched near the car, staring at the untouched coffee cup. It was still warm. That detail chilled him. She couldn't have been gone long. Whatever had happened, it had happened quickly. Investigators tried to piece together a timeline. Her last radio call had been at 9:30 p.m. She sounded calm, routine. By 9:40, dispatch couldn't reach her. By 9:50, the first patrol car was on the scene. 10, maybe 15 minutes total. That was all it took for a uniformed officer, armed and alert, to vanish without a trace. Search teams spread farther. They combed the ditches. They walked shoulder to shoulder through tall grass. Some checked old barns nearby. Others searched the riverbank. But the results were always the same: nothing. Her squad car was logged as evidence. Crime scene tape went up, sealing off the area. The engine was turned off, the keys bagged. Every object, her notebook, her flashlight, her hat, was carefully photographed. But the photographs didn't answer the one question on everyone's mind. Where was she? Word spread fast. Soon, reporters gathered near the highway, asking questions police couldn't answer. Locals showed up, some offering to help, others just watching in shock. A few whispered their fears. If someone could make a police officer vanish, then no one was safe. Back at the station, officers listened again to her last radio call. Her voice had been steady, professional. She hadn't sounded alarmed. No hint of struggle, no warning, just routine words. And then nothing. One veteran officer said quietly, "This doesn't make sense. It's like she vanished in seconds." The others nodded. They had seen traffic stops turn violent. They had seen officers attacked, cars ambushed, criminals resist arrest. But there was always a sign, a fight, a gunshot, a chase. Here, there was none of that. The scene gave them only silence. By dawn, the area was crawling with search teams. Helicopters swept overhead. Officers on horseback moved through the fields. Every shadow was checked, every sound investigated. But by sunrise, there was still no trace of her. Her badge, her radio, her sidearm, all missing. Her body gone. It was as if she had walked off into the dark and been swallowed whole. And for the men and women who had searched all night, the truth was undeniable. Something had happened on that lonely dirt road, something fast and terrifying. And no one knew if she was alive or dead. The call went out across the county. An officer was missing. Within minutes, patrol cars screamed through the night, lights flashing red and blue across empty highways. Dispatchers worked phones nonstop, reaching nearby towns, alerting every available unit. By midnight, roadblocks were set up across the rural routes. Officers checked every car passing through, hopping for a clue. Helicopters circled overhead, sweeping giant spotlights over the woods. The quiet farmland that usually slept peacefully was suddenly alive with chaos. Floodlights were hauled out and pointed into the trees. Shadows stretched across the branches, turning the woods into something eerie and uncertain. Radios crackled with orders. Search every ditch. Check every barn. Don't leave a square foot untouched. Her fellow officers worked with urgency. Some had tears in their eyes. She was one of their own, and they refused to believe she had just walked away. By 2 a.m., dozens of officers were already in the woods. They carried rifles, flashlights, and maps. The hunt wasn't just for a missing officer, it was for answers. And in those first desperate hours, no one could escape one chilling thought. If someone could take down a trained cop, that same person could be out there watching them right now. The sense of danger was real. By morning, the search had grown even bigger. Volunteers from town showed up, some carrying lanterns, others just wanting to help. Farmers left their fields. Store owners locked up early. Everyone wanted to join the hunt. Dozens of officers formed long search lines. Shoulder to shoulder, they walked across open fields, through thick brush, calling her name again and again. Radios popped with constant chatter. Nothing here, moving to the next sector. Bloodhounds were released, noses low, pulling their handlers toward possible trails. At times, the dogs seemed to catch a scent, but every lead ended quickly, like the trail had been cut off. Overhead, helicopters flew slow and steady, scanning the land with bright spotlights. From the air, searchers could see barns, ponds, and winding trails. Each location was marked, logged, and checked. Teams of divers entered nearby rivers, the cold water turning black under their lights. They searched beneath logs, inside culverts, along every bend. Nothing. Reporters now filled the area, broadcasting live updates. Locals watched on TV in disbelief. This was their neighbor, their officer, the woman who had always answered calls for help. And now, she was the one who needed saving. Despite all the manpower, despite all the technology, there was still no sign. The officer had simply vanished. Within days, the case exploded onto national news. Satellite trucks rolled into the small town, their tall antennas sticking up like towers above the streets. Reporters crowded outside the police station, shoving microphones at officers who had nothing new to say. Headlines across the country blared. Officer vanishes on duty and strangest missing cop case in America. The story wasn't just local anymore, it had become national, even global. Every detail, no matter how small, was broadcast on TV. Her last radio call was replayed over and over. Images of her patrol car, still idling by the dirt road, appeared on front pages. The photo of her smiling in uniform was shown so often that people across the country now knew her face. The attention fueled the fire. Every move the police made was filmed. Every search line was followed by cameras. Officers could barely step into the woods without reporters asking, "Have you found her?" The community, once quiet and private, felt invaded. Strangers filled their streets, asking questions, spreading rumors. The town wasn't just dealing with a mystery anymore. They were under a spotlight, and that spotlight only made the fear grow bigger. As the search dragged on with no answers, whispers began to spread. In diners, gas stations, and grocery stores, locals leaned close and traded theories. Some said it had to be revenge. She had arrested plenty of dangerous men in her career. Maybe one of them waited for her that night, ambushing her on the road. Others whispered something darker. Maybe she hadn't been taken at all. Maybe she had run away. It didn't make sense. She loved her job, she loved her family, but when people are desperate for answers, even wild theories take root. A third idea spread quickly, and it terrified the town most of all. What if this wasn't random? What if a killer was out there, hunting, and had started with her? Parents began keeping their kids inside. Farmers carried shotguns while working their fields. Neighbors locked their doors for the first time in years. The fear was thicker than the forest they searched. Her family pushed back against every rumor. They insisted she would never run, never quit, never leave her badge behind. But no matter what they said, the silence kept feeding the doubts. And the longer she stayed missing, the louder those whispers became. While the town whispered and the media speculated, her family stood firm. They refused to let her story be twisted into gossip. To them, she wasn't a headline. She was their daughter. She was their sister. She was the protector who had promised to come home after every shift. Within a week of her disappearance, the family stood before cameras. Her mother held up a framed photo of her in uniform. Her father stood beside her, jaw tight, eyes red from nights without sleep. Her siblings gathered around, their faces pale with fear and anger. Her mother spoke first. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. "My daughter would never leave us. She loved her job. She loved her family. She is out there and we need her home." Reporters asked harsh questions. Did they believe she had run away? Did they think she was hurt? The family cut them off. She would never abandon her badge. She would never abandon us. They begged for help. They pleaded with anyone who might know something, even the person responsible. "If you have her, please let her go, please." Behind the cameras, officers stood silently. Some wiped away tears. They knew her family was right. She was reliable. She never missed a call, never missed a shift. Walking away from duty wasn't in her nature. The family turned their house into a command center. Flyers with her picture were stacked on the kitchen table. Relatives drove to nearby towns, tapping posters to store windows and telephone poles. Friends organized prayer vigils at the local church. Strangers mailed letters of support from across the country. At night, the house was filled with quiet sobs. Her bed was left untouched. Her mother sat at the table, writing letters addressed to her daughter, promising to keep the porch light on until she returned. Her father kept packing, replaying her last words, refusing to believe those words would be the last. The media kept pressing, calling it one of the strangest missing officer cases in America. But for the family, it wasn't strange. It was personal. Every newscast was like a knife. Every rumor felt like an attack. When the reporters left, when the cameras shut off, the family stayed in their living room, clutching the same photo they had shown to the world. They didn't see a mystery. They didn't see a case file. They saw the smiling young woman who had worn the badge with pride. They saw their daughter, and they refused to believe she was gone. With the search turning up nothing, detectives shifted focus. If the woods didn't hold answers, maybe her paperwork did. They gathered inside the station's briefing room, covering tables with her recent case files. Traffic stops, arrest reports, court documents, everything she had touched in the weeks before her disappearance was spread out in front of them. Detectives leaned over photos, scanning for connections. Had she pulled over the wrong car? Had someone she arrested sworn revenge? Every detail suddenly felt important. One report showed she had recently ticketed a man for drunk driving. He had shouted at her, calling her names. Another file showed a domestic violence arrest. The suspect's family had openly cursed the police. Then there were drug cases, burglary cases, stolen cars. The list of possible grudges grew longer by the hour. They built timelines marking her interactions day by day. Investigators asked themselves, who had motive? Who had opportunity? The problem was, there were too many. In a small town, grudges ran deep. People didn't forget when they were arrested, embarrassed, or fined. And this officer had done her job well. She had stopped dozens of people, and some of them hated her for it. The files gave detectives names, but they didn't give them answers. Next, deputies started knocking on doors. They rounded up the usual suspects, local troublemakers, men with long records, and anyone who had crossed paths with her. One man was brought in who had once threatened her after a drug arrest. He sat in the interrogation room, arms crossed, refusing to look detectives in the eye. He swore he had nothing to do with her disappearance. His alibi checked out. Another suspect, known for violence, was questioned for hours. He admitted he didn't like her but said he hadn't seen her in months. Detectives checked his story. It held. One by one, names were crossed off the list. Some suspects had motives. Some had grudges. But none of them had evidence tying them to what happened that night. Rumors swirled in town. People whispered that maybe a career criminal had gotten revenge. Others suggested maybe someone closer to her, even someone inside law enforcement, could have been involved. The theories spread faster than the facts. Detectives pressed on, frustrated. They were used to building cases with fingerprints, witnesses, or video. Here, they had nothing, just an officer's car on a dirt road and silence. The more people they questioned, the colder the trail became. At first, all eyes were on the public. Detectives searched the case files, questioned criminals, and followed every tip. But as the weeks dragged on with no answers, the spotlight began to shift. People in town started to whisper something few wanted to believe. What if the danger wasn't out there? What if it was inside the department itself? The idea seemed unthinkable. These were men and women sworn to protect the community, but some noticed cracks forming in the story. Why was there no radio call for help? Why did no one hear a struggle? And how could a trained officer just vanish without leaving a trace? The questions made people look closer at the officers themselves. In the station, tension grew heavy. Every glance felt loaded. Every silence carried suspicion. Some officers openly defended the department, saying no one would ever harm their own. Others admitted quietly that not everyone wore the badge for the right reasons. Detectives began to check alibis not just of suspects in town but of fellow deputies. They reviewed patrol logs. They questioned shifts. They looked for gaps in time that didn't add up. Behind closed doors, investigators asked the hard questions. Had anyone inside argued with her? Had she been threatened by another officer? Nothing concrete surfaced, but the whispers didn't stop. Reporters picked up on the rumor of an inside job. They published headlines suggesting the sheriff's office itself might be hiding something. For the community, trust in law enforcement began to fracture. People who once waved at passing patrol cars now looked at them with suspicion. Were they protectors or suspects? The family heard these rumors too, and it crushed them. They had always believed the department would protect their daughter. Now even that trust was in doubt. And still, the biggest question lingered. If it really was someone inside the department, how could anyone prove it? Because the truth was, there was no evidence. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no recordings, just silence. And silence can be louder than anything else. While rumors of an inside job spread, investigators explored another possibility, the ambush theory. Maybe she hadn't just vanished into thin air. Maybe someone had planned it. Detectives laid out her patrol route on a map. She drove the same stretch of road many nights. Locals knew her schedule. Criminals, too. What if someone waited in the dark, knowing exactly when she would pass? The idea seemed possible. Officers knew ambushes had happened before, but as they studied the scene, problems appeared. For one, there were no signs of a struggle. No overturned gravel, no footprints, no blood. If she had been pulled from her car, wouldn't there be something left behind? And her patrol car itself looked normal. No dents, no shattered glass. The engine still ran. It was as if she had simply stepped out and disappeared. Still, detectives couldn't ignore the possibility. They looked into people with grudges, former arrestees, angry locals, even people with records of violence against officers. Each name brought a new round of questioning, but every time the trail went cold. No one had been seen near her route. No one bragged about hurting her. And without evidence, the ambush theory remained just that, a theory. But for many in the town, it was the scariest theory of all. Because if someone could plan and execute an ambush on a police officer, then no one was safe. The family had reached their breaking point. Weeks had gone by and still, no answers. Every morning they woke up with the same question, where is she? And every night they went to bed without knowing. Her mother clutched the phone constantly, waiting for a call that never came. Every time it rang, her heart jumped. And every time it wasn't news, her heart sank deeper. Her father grew restless. He called detectives, pressed for updates, demanded results. But all he got were the same words, "We're working on it." For the family, that wasn't enough. She wasn't just a missing officer. She was their daughter, their sister, their protector. They refused to believe she would simply walk away. She had plans. She had responsibilities. She had dreams. None of it fit with the idea that she left on her own. At press conferences, they stood in front of cameras holding her photo. Their voices cracked as they begged for answers. Her sister spoke directly to the crowd. "She wouldn't leave us, please. Someone knows something. Please come forward." The family began their own search. They drove the roads she once patrolled. They walked the woods with flashlights. They knocked on doors, asking neighbors if they had seen anything, even the smallest detail. But every search ended the same, empty. The pain spread through their home. Meals went untouched. Laughter disappeared. The house grew quiet like the silence of the night she vanished. The family clung to hope, but each passing day made it harder. Friends tried to comfort them, but comfort was impossible. Every unanswered phone call, every dead-end lead, every empty night chipped away at their strength. And still, they refused to give up. Her mother said it best, "Until we know what happened, we will never stop looking." While the family pushed forward, locals carried their own fears. In small-town diners and church parking lots, people whispered about the woods. The forest stretched for miles, thick with trees, caves, and old trails. If someone wanted to hide something or someone, there was no better place. Some believed she had been buried deep in the soil, hidden beneath fallen leaves. Others spoke of caves that ran for miles underground, places no search team could fully reach. The whispers grew darker. Hunters swore they heard strange noises in the woods at night. Hikers claimed they felt watched. Search parties combed the area with dogs and flashlights, but the woods seemed endless. Every path led to more paths. Every clearing led to more questions. Detectives marked maps with red pins, showing every place they had searched. But there were always more places left unsearched. For locals, the forest became a shadow. Parents warned their kids not to wander too far. Hunters stayed closer to the edges. Even longtime residents admitted they felt uneasy. The woods had always been a part of life in the county, but now they were tied to fear. To some, it felt like the forest itself was holding secrets. Weeks turned into months. The frantic pace of the search began to slow. At first, the roads had been filled with patrol cars, floodlights, and volunteers. The woods had echoed with voices calling her name, but now those voices were gone. The forest was silent again. Leads that once seemed promising had dried up. Each new tip ended in disappointment. Every rumor fell apart under investigation. The case that once filled headlines started slipping to the back pages. Other stories took over. Other emergencies demanded attention. But for her family, nothing changed. Their lives were still frozen on the night she vanished. Detectives sat with cold case files spread across tables, but even they admitted they were stuck. The evidence was thin. The crime scene was empty. No body, no weapon, no witnesses. It was as if she had been erased. Theories multiplied. Some believed she was ambushed. Others said she was betrayed. A few whispered that she had chosen to leave, but none of those ideas had proof. And with no proof, the case could not move forward. New recruits at the department still heard her name during training. They were told her story as a warning, a reminder that danger could strike even on the quietest nights. But even inside the department, morale had dropped. Detectives felt haunted. Officers carried unease on every patrol. If one of their own could vanish without a trace, then no one was safe. The family continued to hold vigils. Candles flickered in the town square. Neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder holding her photo. Each time, fewer people came, but her family refused to stop. Her mother still wrote letters to her every birthday. Letters filled with updates, hopes, and prayers. Letters that were placed beside her framed photo on the mantel. Her father sat at the kitchen table late into the night, staring at maps, circling roads she used to drive. He refused to believe the trail was truly cold. But the silence pressed harder as the months dragged on. Detectives quietly admitted the truth. Without new evidence, there was little more they could do. By the one-year mark, the search had slowed to only occasional check-ins. Her case was officially labeled cold. The town tried to move forward, but shadows lingered. The empty patrol car, the unanswered radio call, the missing officer, these were not things that could be forgotten. And for her family, there was no moving forward, only waiting. Months turned into years, and the case that once shook the town began to slip from memory. At first, every newspaper ran updates. Every newscast mentioned her name. Reporters swarmed the station, waiting for a breakthrough. But as weeks passed with no answers, the headlines grew smaller. Soon, they were gone. Big city crimes took over the front pages. National networks stopped sending trucks. The story that had once been called one of the strangest missing officer cases in America now barely made the back section of the local paper. The search that had once lit up the woods was now a memory. The floodlights had been packed away. The volunteers had gone home. Even the road where her car was found no longer had patrol cars guarding it. In town, conversations shifted. At diners, people stopped whispering about her case. At schools, students stopped asking about the missing officer. It was as if the silence had grown too heavy and people simply chose to move on. But her family could not move on. For them, every day felt like April 12, 1991. For them, the case wasn't a headline, it was their life. Life in the town carried on. Businesses reopened their doors. Kids went back to sports. Families gathered at church. On the surface, everything looked normal again. But under the surface, a shadow lingered. Locals avoided the place where her patrol car was found. Drivers pressed harder on the gas when they reached that lonely dirt road, refusing to slow down, refusing to look. The spot became a wound the town didn't want to face. At night, neighbors locked their doors earlier. Parents told kids not to wander past dark. The idea that someone could vanish without a trace had left its mark. Even years later, small things reminded people of her. A police siren in the distance, a uniform seen in passing, a photo tucked into a library archive. Each reminder reopened the unease. Inside the police department, her empty locker was still there. New recruits were told her story during training, warned never to take routine calls lightly. For most people in town, life looked normal, but deep down, everyone knew it was. A question still hung in the air. How could an officer vanish in their own backyard? While the town tried to move forward, her family could not. Her parents kept her bedroom exactly as it was the day she vanished. The bed was still made neatly. The uniform she had worn the week before still hung in the closet. On her desk sat her police academy photo, a younger version of her smiling proudly in her new badge. Dust collected, but nothing was touched. It was as if they were waiting for her to walk back in at any moment. Her mother cooked the same meals she used to love, just in case. On the mantel, her picture remained in the center, surrounded by candles that were lit every evening. At family dinners, her name was spoken out loud, never hidden. They refused to let her memory fade, even when the world seemed determined to forget. Every time the phone rang, her father paused, hopping for news. He admitted later that for years, part of him believed she might suddenly call and say she had been found alive somewhere. The silence, instead, was crushing. Her siblings also carried the weight. They grew older, got jobs, started families of their own, but inside they felt stuck in 1991. Every holiday, every birthday, every milestone came with the same empty chair at the table. While the police department filed reports and closed cases, the family lived inside the one case that never closed. For them, she wasn't just a missing officer. She was a daughter, a sister, and the heart of their home. And time for them had stopped. On every birthday, every Christmas, and every holiday in between, her mother wrote letters. They were written in neat cursive, often beginning with "Dear Sweetheart." The letters described family updates, town gossip, and reminders of how much she was loved. Sometimes they were hopeful. "We can't wait for the day you walk back through the door." Other times they were heartbreaking. "Even if you can't come home, I hope you know we will never stop looking." Each letter was placed in a box in her room. Over the years, the stack grew thicker, filling folders and binders. To her mother, writing was the only way to fight the silence. Relatives begged her to stop, saying it only made the pain worse. But she refused. To her, the letters weren't just words. They were proof that her daughter had not been forgotten. For the family, hope became both a comfort and a curse. It gave them something to hold on to, but it also kept them trapped in endless waiting. Every year the candles on her birthday cake were still lit. Every year her name was spoken out loud. And every year another letter was written. Inside the police department, her absence never faded. Her locker was never reassigned. Some officers said they avoided looking at it, while others placed small notes or flowers inside as a quiet tribute. The space was a daily reminder that one of their own had vanished while wearing the badge. New recruits heard her story on their very first day. Trainers spoke her name, explained her case, and reminded rookies that even the safest-looking call could turn deadly. For many, it was less a lesson and more a chilling warning. Duty could disappear you in an instant. Veterans carried their own guilt. Some wondered if they should have checked on her faster that night. Others regretted not pushing harder in the early days of the search. The what-ifs became part of the department's culture. Her picture stayed framed on the station wall. Officers walked by it every day, saluting silently or pausing to look. The department didn't just lose an officer, they lost their sense of security. Her case haunted them, a wound that refused to close. Over the years, detectives reopened her case again and again. Every few years, a new team would gather the files. Stacks of folders, photos of the dirt road, lists of suspects. They spread them across tables, hoping fresh eyes might see something others had missed. Each time, theories surfaced. Some detectives leaned on the ambush idea, convinced she had been targeted. Others thought she might have chased someone into the woods and never made it back. A few whispered darker suspicions, that someone in uniform knew more than they were saying. But theories alone were not evidence. Searches were repeated, old suspects were re-questioned, tips were checked, but every lead went nowhere. Witnesses forgot details, suspects had alibis, time erased clues. The files grew thicker, packed with interviews, maps, and dead ends. Detectives admitted it felt like running in circles. Each reopening ended the same way: no answers. For the family, these reopenings felt like cruel promises. Hope would spark, only to be crushed again when detectives closed the file once more. Inside the department, frustration mounted. Some officers said the case was cursed. Others said it was simply impossible. But no one ever forgot. It was 2006, 15 years after the patrol officer had vanished. Far from the town, in the hills where the forest thickened, a small group of hobby cave explorers set out on a weekend trip. They weren't professionals, just locals who loved the challenge of finding new passageways hidden beneath the ground. Their goal that day was to map out a little-known cave system that only a handful of people had ever entered. The group carried ropes, helmets, lights, and notebooks. For them, this was an adventure. None of them thought they were walking into one of the darkest mysteries in the county. The cave had no name, just a small opening half buried in brush. Most people would have walked past it without ever noticing, but the explorers knew how to spot the signs: cool air rushing from the ground, cracks in the limestone, and the smell of damp earth. As they stepped inside, their voices echoed off the stone. They were excited, laughing, and eager to see where the tunnels might lead. What they didn't know was that, in the darkness below, something had been waiting for 15 years. The explorers squeezed through the first tunnels, their headlamps cutting thin beams into the dark. The cave was tight, damp, and slippery with mud. Water dripped from the ceiling, splashing onto their helmets. Every crawl forward was slow and careful. They marked the walls with chalk arrows so they wouldn't get lost. The air grew colder the deeper they went. Their hands and knees were caked in mud, and the silence pressed down like a weight. One of the explorers took the lead, sliding through a narrow passage barely wide enough for his shoulders. On the other side, the tunnel opened into a low chamber. As he scanned the ground with his light, something caught his eye. It wasn't rock, it wasn't mud. It was something metallic, buried halfway in the dirt. At first he thought it was just trash, maybe a piece of old equipment left behind. But when he brushed away the mud, the shape became clear: a badge. And not just any badge, a police badge. The group crowded around the explorer who had uncovered the metallic object. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than an old scrap of junk. The cave floor was littered with rocks, broken sticks, and rusted bits of metal from past visitors. But as he rubbed away more of the thick mud, details began to emerge: a circular edge, a set of numbers, then letters. The others leaned in closer, their lights bouncing off the object. One of them gasped as the words became clear: police. It wasn't just a piece of trash, it was a badge. The group fell silent. For a moment, no one spoke. They knew enough about local history to realize what they might have found. 15 years earlier, a patrol officer had vanished in this very county. Her badge had never been recovered. The cave suddenly felt different. The fun, adventurous energy drained away, replaced with a heavy, unsettling silence. They weren't just exploring anymore. They were standing in the middle of a crime scene. As the shock of the badge set in, another explorer swept his light across the muddy chamber. Something bulky was half buried near the wall. He crouched, dug into the dirt with his gloves, and tugged it free. The object was heavy, coated in grime and rusted at the edges. He turned it over in his hands. At first it looked like some old tool, but then the faint outline of buttons appeared. A bent antenna, a cracked speaker. It was a radio. Not just any radio, a police radio. The group stared at the markings still faintly etched into the casing. The letters matched the officer's department. Despite the years underground, it was unmistakable. The weight of what they were holding hit all of them at once. Two objects side by side, buried in mud for over a decade. A badge and a radio. Both belonged to the missing patrol officer. The explorers froze. The cave, once just an adventure, had become terrifying. Every sound, every drip of water, every shuffle of boots felt louder, heavier. They knew they had to leave. One of them carefully placed the badge and radio into a bag. Their plan to map tunnels was abandoned. They climbed out in silence, each of them carrying the same chilling thought. After 15 years, the mystery had not been forgotten by time. And now, for the first time, there was proof that she had been here. The cave explorers stared at the mud-caked badge and radio. The air seemed heavier now. Nobody spoke at first. Their flashlights bounced across the dripping walls, but all eyes stayed fixed on the objects in their hands. One of them whispered, "No way, this can't be real." They all knew the story. Everyone in the area did. The missing officer. 15 years gone, no trace, no closure. Her case was the town's most famous mystery. And now, right here in front of them, were things that clearly belonged to her. At first, panic set in. Some wanted to get out of the cave immediately. Others argued they couldn't just leave this behind. What if more was here? What if her body was nearby? Their flashlights swept nervously over the mud, as if expecting to see bones or something worse. The weight of the discovery hit them harder with each second. This wasn't just junk. These weren't random objects. These were pieces of someone's life, evidence tied to a woman who vanished while serving her community. Finally, one of the explorers said firmly, "We need to call the police. Right now." They scrambled for a cell signal, climbing closer to the cave entrance until a phone finally connected. The words came fast and shaky. "We're in the North Hills cave system. We found a badge and a police radio. We think it belongs to the missing officer. You need to get here." The group stayed together, silent, waiting. Fear mixed with a strange sense of duty. They hadn't gone looking for answers, but now the responsibility was in their hands. For the first time in 15 years, the silence around the case had been broken. The response was immediate. Within hours, law enforcement vehicles lined the dirt road leading to the cave system. Flashing lights cut through the trees as uniformed officers and detectives moved with urgency. The site was sealed off. Yellow crime scene tape stretched across the rocky entrance. What had once been just another hidden cave was now treated like a crime scene. Teams of forensic experts unpacked their gear, cameras, evidence bags, lights, and tools. Search and rescue units prepared ropes and harnesses to guide the investigators deeper underground. Every movement was methodical. Every detail mattered. Detectives briefed the explorers, listening carefully to how and where they had found the badge and the radio. The explorers' voices shook as they described the moment. Officers reassured them. They had done the right thing by calling. Inside, the cave echoed with new sounds. Boots on stone, radios crackling, the hum of portable lights being set up. The once dark chambers now glowed under harsh beams as teams fanned out in every direction. The badge and radio were collected first, photographed, tagged, carefully sealed in evidence bags. Investigators treated them as sacred pieces of a long-lost puzzle. But the search didn't stop there. Crews combed the mud and rocks, scanning for anything else, scraps of fabric, bone fragments, or signs of struggle. Every corner was inspected. Every crack in the rock was probed. Outside, reporters began to gather. The story had spread quickly. After years of silence, the case was alive again. For the first time in 15 years, investigators had more than just theories. They had physical evidence. And with that came a flood of new hope and new fear. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone felt it. Whatever was hidden in this cave could finally reveal the truth. The discovery spread like wildfire. By the next morning, news vans crowded the small roads leading to the hills. Reporters broadcast live from the scene, their voices urgent, their expressions serious. The missing officer's name was back on every television screen and front page. For 15 years, her case had been treated like a fading memory. People whispered about it now and then, but it had slipped into the background of daily life. That ended the moment the badge and radio were found. Suddenly, it wasn't just a cold case anymore. It was breaking news. Her family was the first to feel the shift. They gathered together, watching the reports. For years, they had spoken to empty microphones, begging anyone to come forward. Now their words finally had weight again. One family member whispered, "Maybe this is it. Maybe we'll finally know." Hope and fear wrestled in every glance they exchanged. At the police station, officers who hadn't even been on the force when she vanished lined up at the briefing room. The chief stood before them, holding up a photo of the badge, his voice steady but emotional. "This is real. We treat this like the day she disappeared. Nobody slacks. Nobody assumes. We do this right." For veterans of the department, it was like reopening an old wound. For the younger officers, it was a chance to prove themselves. Around town, the reaction was immediate. Old flyers reappeared in shop windows. People who had barely thought about the case in years now stopped strangers to talk about it. Some believed the discovery meant her body was nearby, hidden in the caves. Others feared something darker, that the objects had been planted, a cruel game meant to confuse investigators. Not everyone welcomed the sudden attention. Some residents quietly admitted they dreaded what the cave might reveal. After all, evidence can bring answers, but answers can bring pain. If her remains were there, it would end the waiting, but it would also force everyone to face the reality of how she died. Still, the spark of hope was undeniable. For the first time in over a decade, the town buzzed with energy. Conversations returned to the missing officer. Theories spread online. Families lit candles again. And her parents, though cautious, allowed themselves to believe that closure might finally be near. But along with the hope came fear. What if the cave held more than just her belongings? What if the truth hiding underground was worse than anyone imagined? The case was no longer silent. The story had reawakened, and with it, the promise and terror of what lay ahead. The morning after the discovery, law enforcement organized the first official search of the cave. Trucks and vans lined the gravel road leading to the hills. Officers, forensic teams, and rescue specialists unloaded gear: helmets, harnesses, ropes, cameras, and heavy flashlights. The cave mouth looked small from the outside, just a dark hole hidden by brush. But everyone knew it stretched for miles underground. No one spoke much as they suited up. The weight of the missing officer's case hung in the air. At the entrance, the lead investigator gave a clear order: no mistakes, no rushing, document everything. Teams clipped safety lines to their belts and ducked inside. The temperature dropped instantly. Their breath fogged in the beam of their lights. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to crouch, then crawl. The sound of boots scraping rock echoed like thunder. Radios crackled faintly, but most of the cave swallowed the noise. Each step deeper added tension. What waited below? A missing piece of history, or the answer everyone both wanted and feared? The passages twisted and turned. Mud clung to their gloves. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling. Every movement was slow, careful, deliberate. For the first time in 15 years, the search was alive again. About an hour into the crawl, one of the forensic specialists stopped. His light had caught something sticking out of the mud. At first glance, it looked like a piece of old cloth. He knelt down, brushing dirt aside. The fabric was dark, heavy, and frayed. Another officer leaned closer and said quietly, "That's not just trash." They lifted it carefully into a bag. Underneath, more scraps appeared: torn fabric, partly shredded, partly preserved by the damp cave air. The pieces carried faint traces of color, the kind worn on law enforcement uniforms in the 1990s. A hush fell over the group. Everyone knew what it meant. They were no longer searching for random items. They had found something that tied directly to the missing officer. The lead detective ordered the team to expand the search. Hands and lights swept across the muddy floor, scanning every inch. Within minutes, More fragments surfaced: buttons, scraps of stitching, and a piece of cloth with a faint seam line still visible. A forensic tech compared the fragments to old department photos. The match was unmistakable. This wasn't just any clothing, it was her uniform. The silence grew heavier. For years, people wondered if she had been taken far away, maybe even left the state. But the discovery made one thing painfully clear: she had never left the hills. The scraps were photographed, bagged, and tagged. Each one felt like a voice speaking from the past. The team pressed forward, knowing this was only the beginning. The cave had started giving up its secrets. The team pressed deeper into the cave, ropes tied tight as they lowered themselves through a steep drop. The mud grew thicker and the air colder. Halfway down the slope, one of the searchers spotted something sticking out from the dirt. It was black, bent, and oddly shaped. At first, it looked like a piece of rock, but when the mud was brushed away, the object came free. It was a police duty belt, the kind used to hold handcuffs, a holster, and other gear. Only this one was broken. The leather was warped and twisted as if something heavy had crushed it. Metal clips were bent out of shape. The flashlight holder hung empty, ripped along the seam. The search team stared at it in silence. Duty belts were built tough. They weren't supposed to snap, bend, or tear. Yet this one looked like it had taken enormous force, the kind that could only come from a fall, an accident, or a violent struggle. The lead investigator ordered it sealed in a bag. It wasn't just a clue. It was a sign that whatever happened here had been violent, and they weren't at the end yet. At the very bottom of the drop, the passage widened into a shallow chamber. The beam of a flashlight swept across the mud and stopped cold. There, half buried in silt and stone, lay human bones. The cave fell silent except for dripping water. No one spoke. The searchers knew instantly what they were seeing. Years of questions had led to this moment. Forensic experts stepped forward carefully. Gloves and tools were brought out. Piece by piece, they began lifting the remains. A skull, ribs, arm bones, and fragments of a jaw. Time in the cave had worn them down, but the outline of a body was clear. Every movement was documented, every bone placed in evidence bags. The cave had kept her secret for 15 years, but now it was finally giving her back. When the last piece was lifted, no one doubted who it was. Later, DNA would confirm it. The missing officer had been found. After so long, the mystery was no longer about where she was. It became about how she ended up here and why. Once the bones were removed from the cave, investigators gathered to review what they had. The evidence raised more questions than answers. One group of detectives believed the officer had fallen while in pursuit. They pointed to the broken belt, the scattered fabric, and the steep drop. Maybe she had been chasing a suspect into the darkness, only to lose her footing. The cave was dangerous, and one slip could be fatal. But not everyone agreed. Others argued that the scene didn't fit an accident. They believed she had been dragged inside. The placement of the remains, far from the entry, suggested she might not have walked in willingly. And the crushed belt, to them, looked like the result of a struggle. Meetings grew tense. Some saw a tragic accident. Others whispered of foul play. Still, the evidence refused to confirm either story. There were no fingerprints, no weapon, no trace of another person. In the end, investigators were left split. The cave had revealed her body, but it had not revealed the truth of what happened that night. The strangest piece of evidence was not inside the cave at all. Her badge and her radio had been found earlier, in different spots, away from her bones. To investigators, this detail was haunting. If she had simply fallen, why weren't these items near her? Police radios were clipped firmly to a belt. Badges were pinned to uniforms. Yet here, they had been separated. Some thought the fall might have torn them away. But the radio, heavy and durable, looked like it had been placed, almost wedged into the mud. The badge, too, seemed oddly clean for something buried so long. That led to darker theories. Maybe someone had removed them, tossing them aside before or after dragging her into the cave. Maybe the separation was deliberate, meant to confuse or hide the truth. Whatever the reason, investigators agreed on one thing: the placement of the badge and radio did not make sense. It was the kind of detail that kept the case open, even after she had been found. When the case files were updated with the cave discovery, everyone hoped the mystery would finally be solved. But instead of answers, the cave only brought more confusion. If the officer had fallen, why had she entered the cave in the first place? Her patrol route did not include those hills. No one could explain what would have drawn her there alone, late at night. If foul play was involved, then who was responsible? Investigators had no suspects. No new evidence pointed to an attacker, and after 15 years, too much time had passed to track fresh leads. The broken belt, the scattered fabric, the remains at the bottom of a drop, they could all suggest an accident, but the separated badge and radio continued to raise suspicion. Those details didn't fit neatly into either theory. For her family, the discovery was bittersweet. They finally had a body to lay to rest, but not the truth they had begged for all those years. The same pain remained, not knowing what really happened on that lonely road in 1991. Even today, the cave is remembered not as a place of answers, but as the site of more questions. After 15 long years, her family finally received a call they had both wanted and feared. Investigators told them her remains had been confirmed. For the first time since that April night in 1991, they would have something to bury. Her parents, now older and frailer, sat in silence as the box was placed before them. It was not how they had imagined welcoming her home. Relief mixed with heartbreak. They had answers, but not the one they had prayed for. Her siblings gathered around, touching the container like it might bring them closer to her. One whispered, "She's home now," while another quietly cried. The family began planning a memorial they had never wanted to hold. Neighbors offered food, friends brought flowers, and the small-town community promised to attend. Yet none of it felt like enough. For 15 years, her parents had kept her room the same, hoping she might walk back in one day. Now, they faced the truth that she never would. The goodbye they had been waiting for was finally here, but it felt more like another loss. Her badge, discovered deep in the cave, was cleaned and polished. Investigators no longer needed it as evidence. The department decided it would be returned to her family. When the small velvet box was opened, silence filled the room. The badge gleamed under the light, scratched but still whole. It had survived 15 years underground, waiting to come home. Officers carried it with ceremony. It was not just a piece of metal, it was the symbol of who she was, what she stood for, and what she lost her life doing. The chief held it with both hands, saying, "This belongs where it should have always been." Her parents wept as they accepted it. They placed it on the mantel beside her photo, where it caught the sun each morning. For them, it wasn't just evidence. It was proof that she had never abandoned her post, that she had stayed true to her duty until the end. Among officers, the badge became sacred. They spoke of it with respect, treating it as a reminder of loyalty, sacrifice, and the cost of the uniform. The day of the service, the town gathered in silence. Hundreds came, filling the small church and spilling outside into the parking lot. A long line of officers stood shoulder to shoulder. When the family arrived, the officers raised their hands in a slow, unified salute. The only sounds were footsteps and the faint ring of a church bell. Inside, her photo rested at the front, her badge displayed beside it. Flowers surrounded the display, brought by people who had known her, and people who only knew her story. Her mother clutched a folded flag. Her father sat stiff, staring ahead, unwilling to break. Her siblings cried openly, holding each other. The chief spoke of her bravery, of her dedication, and of the mystery that had stolen her. "She will never be forgotten," he said. Then the bell rang again, 12 times. Each strike echoed through the room. When it ended, the silence was heavier than the words spoken. The town left knowing they had honored a life cut short, but also knowing the questions around her death would never fully go away. Even after she was laid to rest, the debate never ended. People wanted closure, but the mystery gave them none. Some believed she had been forced into the cave. They pictured a struggle, a suspect dragging her through the narrow tunnels, discarding her badge and radio to cover their tracks. The broken belt and scattered fabric seemed to support that idea. Others argued it was simply a tragic fall. Maybe she had followed a noise or chased someone into the hills. In the dark, One wrong step could have sent her down the drop where her bones were found. To them, it was duty that cost her life, not murder. But no single answer satisfied everyone. Each theory had holes, each detail raised more questions. Why were her belongings separated? Why was her patrol car found miles away from the cave? Even with her remains home and a memorial behind them, the town could not agree on what really happened that night in 1991. Theories refused to die, and the truth felt forever out of reach. The town was never the same after her disappearance. For 15 years, it had lived with fear, rumors, and endless searching. With her discovery, that fear shifted into grief, but the shadow remained. A stretch of highway near where her car was found was named in her honor. Drivers passed the sign every day, reminded of the officer who never came home. Schools taught her story in history projects. Children who weren't even born when she vanished grew up knowing her name. They learned it as both a warning and a lesson in loyalty. Stores still kept her photo near the registers. Churches prayed for her family. Even decades later, her face lingered in the minds of people who had once seen her on patrol. The community carried her story like a scar. It was no longer just a case file. It was part of their identity. The town had lost more than an officer. They had lost the sense of safety that once made their streets feel small and protected. For the cave explorer who first spotted the badge, the discovery never faded. He admitted in interviews that he still dreamed about it. He remembered the exact moment, his light catching a glimmer in the mud, the shape of metal just beneath the surface. At first, he thought it was junk, but when he wiped it clean and saw the police lettering, his stomach dropped. He knew the town's mystery instantly, and in that second he realized he was holding evidence tied to a missing officer. Panic and dread rushed over him. He felt the weight of history in his hands. Years later, he confessed that the image haunted him. In his dreams, the badge never stayed buried. It floated in the dark, pulling him back to the cave. The shine in the mud, he said, it carried a ghost with it. Even though he helped solve part of the mystery, he carried his own kind of burden, the memory of being the one who uncovered a truth that brought no peace. Her story did not end in the cave. In the years after her remains were brought home, her police department made a choice that spoke louder than words. They retired her badge number. No officer would ever wear it again. It was set aside, frozen in time, a reminder of the woman who once carried it with pride. Her name was added to state and national memorial walls. Each year during ceremonies, her name was spoken aloud. A bell tolled for her, just as it did for other fallen officers. Families of police across the country, many of whom had never met her, now knew her story. She became part of a brotherhood and sisterhood that stretched far beyond her small town. But her legacy was more than symbols carved into stone or numbers retired. Her case was taught in academies as a warning that danger can come when least expected, and sometimes the truth may never be found. Recruits listened to her story with wide eyes, realizing that even a simple patrol could end in mystery. Her family, though never healed, found comfort in knowing she was remembered. They visited her grave, leaving flowers, notes, and photos. Some days, strangers stopped there too, people who had only read about her or seen her story in the news. The cave where she was found remained sealed, but in quiet corners of the community, her memory lived on. For townsfolk, she became more than just an officer who vanished. She was a reminder of resilience, of what it meant to keep searching even when hope seemed gone. For officers, she was a symbol of sacrifice, someone who gave her life in service, even if the exact circumstances would never be known. Her story carried weight not only because of her duty but because of the unanswered questions that followed. Accident, foul play, a chase gone wrong, nobody could say for sure. And maybe that was why she lingered in people's minds so powerfully. Her legacy was both light and shadow, honor and mystery. A life remembered, a case never fully closed, and a name that time could not erase.